And also on China, this is the absolute ugliness, where it is now being dangled before us, the Australian sellouts to China, that apparently the free trade deal might be at risk because we are, God forbid, displeasing China by doing exactly what 63 other nations want, which is an inquiry into a virus that's killed 300,000 people, that's taken how many jobs and destroyed the economy to the tune of $6 trillion. Senator James Paterson is with the Liberal Party in Victoria. Is quite outspoken on this stuff. Senator, good evening. 63 countries are now exactly where we are, but it feels like we're being held out as the example to try to send a message to the other 63.
It's very encouraging news just released this afternoon, Paul, and it shows that Australia has been right to lead the call for this. Maurice Payne was the first foreign minister and we're the first government in the world to call for an independent inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus and the World Health Organisation's performance in handling it. And we are now being joined not just by that very significant number of countries, Paul, but a very broad range of countries. It includes Russia, it includes India, it includes South Africa, it includes Japan, it includes the European Union, it includes Brazil. Every continent is represented among those countries. So that's very encouraging early steps. There's still a few days to go before the vote on Wednesday, but there's no one who could argue for a moment that Australia is alone.
So in the process here, where we're trying to get this vote up, obviously at the UN, China has a veto power, but that's in the National Security Council and on the Security Council. Does China, as one of the permanent members of that UN Security Council, have an ability to kill whatever vote happens on Wednesday?
Well, this is actually a vote at the World Health Assembly, which is a UN body, but not the same as the Security Council. And my honest hope, Paul, is that no country, China included, will oppose this motion. I can't think of any good reasons why you would be opposed to this. As the Prime Minister said, it's completely unremarkable to ask for an investigation into a very serious global pandemic that's cost hundreds of thousands of lives, it's made millions of people sick, that's smashed the global economy. It would be bizarre for anyone to oppose it at all, in my view.
What about this stuff where our Trade Minister is not getting his calls returned? You know, again, this is all stuff that I think is about sending a cold shoulder message to us to frighten other countries. I think the government's doing exactly the most reasonable and obvious thing here. We know it's not about the people. We're not demanding consequences for the leadership of that country. We're not asking them to change their political system. We're simply asking, hey, we think something went wrong in your country. If you don't think so, then let's see the evidence otherwise and we'll move on to somewhere else.
I agree. Australia is a country that respects the international rules-based order. We are a reliable trading partner. And when issues do emerge from time to time in a bilateral relationship, whether that's with China or any other country, we are open, we are transparent, we seek to address those issues on their merits. It would be concerning if we're not even able to get our counterparts on the phone to discuss these issues. It does send a worrying signal about their intent.
How do you feel about Labor and the lefties that will all turn around and say, too many backbenchers are having plenty to say here, it's not all being left to the ministers? Look, last time I checked, you're a member of Parliament. You're allowed to say whatever the heck you want. There's obviously legal consequences to what anyone says here on air versus parliamentary privilege. OK, but you've got every right to speak out, don't you?
Not only are we allowed to, Paul, I think we've got an obligation to. I've got a job to represent my constituents. And yes, I've got political duties as a Liberal senator, and yes, I've got duties to the government as a Morrison government, and I always try and be as helpful as I can to the cause of the government and the party. I also have to represent my constituents, and I have to give voice to the concerns that they have. And I've been outspoken on this issue for a number of years. And when I first started speaking out on this issue a few years ago, it was against policy of the government of the day, but government of the day's policy has now changed. That's much more in line with the worldview that I have and the worldview that my colleagues do. So if I hadn't have spoken out, that might not have happened. And I think that's vindication for all of us who held the concerns that we do.
I think it was about 48, maybe 60, I'll say 72 hours before we already had 3 state premiers all come out and say the relationship needs to be managed. Penny Wong, the relationship needs to be managed. The university sector, the relationship needs to be managed. Business people, the relationship needs to be managed. We all know what that's code for. Shut up and take it.
You're right, Paul. One of the disappointing features of these debates, whenever they happen, is that code words are used like we should not engage in megaphone diplomacy and we should be measured in our tone and we should use private channels to raise our concerns with the Chinese Communist Party. What that's code for is don't say anything at all because it might hurt the bottom line of a business. Well, I'm sorry, That's not what happens in a free democracy. That's not what happens in a liberal democracy. We have freedom of speech and we should use it. And I think this instance, in its early days, is vindication of that approach. Australia has taken a leadership role, and it looks like other countries are joining us in that. And that's what I want our country to do. I want us to be a proud leader on the global stage.
And what does it tell you about how, as best as I know, not a single Australian university has changed its business model? And the idea that taxpayer-funded organisations have business models is always a bit freaky to me, but anyway, at all about international students, which again is code for largely Chinese students. Not one of them has recalibrated.
That's right. I, in fact, gave a speech about this in the Senate last week. Some of our universities in particular are dangerously exposed to the international student market and the Chinese student market in particular. To give you one concrete example, the University of Sydney has about a quarter of its total revenue, all sources, coming from Chinese international students alone. Now, that's bad business practice from a point of view of diversification, but it's particularly risky when it's from a country like China, which has obviously a very different political system to ours, which has different values to us. And in a university context, the rubber hits the road when it comes to things like academic freedom and free speech and the right to protest for students. I'm very worried about the University of Queensland, for example, which has probably the cosiest relationship with the Chinese Communist Party of any of our universities. And I think it's led them to be compromised in a lot of areas. They're contemplating expelling one of their students who was an activist on these issues on campus. They had a very inadequate agreement with the Confucius Institute on campus, which had no protection for academic freedom. They actually allowed the Chinese Communist Party to directly fund 4 subjects at university, including one which went to China's role in global human rights. I mean, it really is, for a higher education institution in a free country like Australia, it's very uncomfortable.